This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Our goal with our videos is to empower you to be able to do the repairs on your own and save a whole lot of money and also get that great feeling of having fixed it by yourself. Today I'm going to be making a pommel for a broadsword. So I'm making a new broadsword out of spring steel, and the brass pommel that comes with it is good, but it's not quite enough weight at the end to counterbalance the sword. Sword's a bit tip heavy, so we want to build a little more weight on the pommel. One way I was thinking I could do that is to cast a new pommel, which is a little bit more solid brass, which is heavier. I also found an ornamental piece from a dragon statue. I'm going to try to attach that, something like that. And then where there's gaps, I'm going to fill it in temporarily just with wax, and then I'll make a casting, and I might remove some of the brass once it's all done. But basically, actually it'll be this way. This will be at the bottom of the sword, and I think it'll be good. It'll be pretty heavy, good counterbalance, look pretty ornate with the dragon. And to do that casting, what I'm going to do is drive a screw through here into this one. I'm going to drill a pilot hole to connect these. I'll fill in the gaps with some wax. Then I'm going to put my casting sand in here, and got a little wax there for filling in the gaps. So I'll separate it like this. I'll put in the casting sand, and I'll pack it down. Got this guy to pack it down. I'll get it really flat, skim off any extra, skim that off, and then I'll fill the other side and put my dragon pommel in there. I think I'll probably fill it this way. I'll put a depression in here, put this one here, and then put a little powder. Talc is best. I'm just going to use a little cornstarch, and that creates like a barrier so you can separate them later. I'll fill this one with the same clay, and I'll put these two together. They have little pins that index it. And then I'll pap that down nice and tight, and then I'll skim off any extra. And it'll hold together pretty tight. And then when I get my crucible, which is full of brass scraps, superheated, this brass will all melt down, and I'll grab that with my tongs and then pour in the brass, and it'll form this pretty heavy pommel that'll be shaped just like this dragon. So it'll be pretty cool. So I'll show you the step by step. I'm just drilling a little pilot hole into this plastic piece to connect these two, this part of the impression. I'm just going to drill this a little bit deeper. Okay, I've got these two pieces attached via a screw going through here into the dragon, and the little gaps here I'm just going to use candle wax to fill them up, and then once the candle wax is cool, I'll just shape it. That'll make a nice impression then for the sand. Okay, so we got our pieces together. I'm going to melt a little wax to fill in the gaps. Just use a little candle wax. And then once it hardens, I can shape it a little bit better. Could also use clay would work. Try the other side. Just filling in these gaps. And then when I do the impression in the sand, it'll make a good area for the liquid brass to fill in. I'm going to use this crucible full of old brass pieces and melt it in the forge. Once the brass is all formed, then I may use a grinder to get rid of some of the high points. But I just want to get rid of these seams for right now with the wax. So a pretty big one in the front. Cool for a sec. So once we get this all done, we can smooth it out and then we can do the impression. Back there. So I'd like to make the serpent's body be continuous, or the dragon's body. So I got to build up a little more wax there. The wax is pretty malleable when it's still cooling. You can kind of shape it with your fingers. All right. Do a little more work and I'll show you guys. So the wax has allowed the two pieces to be a little bit more continuous, less gap, and that'll make a better impression. Where it's extra, kind of sticking out on the sides, so there'll just be extra brass there, and I can always grind that off once it's fully done. But it'll be a nice heavy piece, a nice pommel. So we're going to go to the impression point next. So we're about to do the impression. We got a first half of the casting mold. I'm going to put a little powder down there. It just acts kind of like a lubricant, so the sand won't stick to it. And then we're going to put the sand in and get it packed in tight. That'll be the first half of the impression for the dragon pommel head. So this is casting sand, and this is really good stuff. Just put it in, pour it in, and then you're going to get it packed down, and then you get it nice and level before you put in your impression. So we're using this thing just to compact it. I want to get it tapped down nice and tight, and then we'll add more of the sand once we tap this down to get it flush with the top of this mold. Don't want to have any gap. So this is just getting this super compressed so it can take an impression without there being less flaws. There's always going to be a little bit of flaws when you do casting, but not as much. So we're going to add more now and then pack that down too. So we can see now that the the level of the sand is above the metal, leaving a little opening here, and we're getting it packed down. And what we want to do is try to get it really flat. So you take some kind of a flat surface and try to skim off any extra and get it as flat as possible. And kind of a straight edge works. Okay, that's pretty good. All right. So we're going to take our dragon impression. We're going to put it about halfway down in there. And the way I want this to fill is I want this part, I want the dragon head to fill first with the molten brass. When I pour it in, this will fill last. So I'm going to put this near the top. Get it where you want it. And then you're going to push it down in to create the impression.
I should have put down a layer of powdered talc right at this point before putting on the impression so the impression wouldn't stick to the sand. That's pretty important.
Using a fair amount of force to get that in. Alright. That's going to be great. We're not halfway in with our impression, but we're maybe a quarter of the way, which is that's fine. And the next part will be where a lot of the brass will fill up on this side. We're going to put a little bit of this stuff in next. So baby powder is probably the best way to go, but just putting this in will act like a barrier or lubricant, so that when you separate the two to get your impression out of there, it'll come clean. I usually want to use like this point like a paintbrush to brush off any extra on your impression, and kind of loosely brush this stuff too, so that it's more finely distributed. Let me go get a paintbrush. Lightly use the paintbrush to get a lot of the powder off of the dragon's face, because that could alter the impression. I'm going to lightly go over the clay just to get it nice and flat. And again, this is just going to act as a way to separate the two halves where the sand won't stick to the other sand. Alright, so now we put on this one. Has these little indexing pieces that help us. We're going to fill sand in here and pack it down, and we'll separate the two. You can get all these things from Amazon pretty cheap. You can get these casting pieces and this clay, or I'm sorry, the sand, pretty cheap. You just need a good heat source to get your, by the crucible, to get your crucible hot enough. I'm just skimming off any extra here on the top. Nice and clean. Alright, looks good. Bring the whole assembly up. And that is where we're going to pour in the molten brass. So we're going to create that opening a little bigger. Alright, now what we want to do is separate these two halves and get our impression out of there. Just take your time, lift up, two sides come apart. Alright, get our dragon out of there. Got our brass heating up here, and doing some normalizing of a couple of blades right here. Here, getting them up to temperature. Only been about maybe 10 minutes. Let's see how we're doing here. Yeah, the brass is getting hot, but it's only about red hot so far. I'm gonna start working on my broadsword too. I got it kind of shaped, but I'm gonna get it nice and hot and then start pounding out the front end to make it a little bit wider. Just heating up the brass now. I've got my mold all ready to pour in, and I got it supported on both sides, so it's unlikely it'll give way. I'm going to put in the molten brass in there for the dragon head. Looks like we're getting there. There's our broadsword.
So we got the brass up to the liquid temperature, about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and poured it into the mold, let it cool, and it turned out to be a really nice dragon brass pommel. So I hope this helps you for your knife and sword making. Thanks so much for watching, and please subscribe.